his heels. If you feel confident that you can whip Lee outside of his intrenchments, I feel equally confident that I can handle him in the open country." Grant promptly adopted the plan, and by formal orders directed Sherman to execute it. Several minor Western expeditions were organized to contribute to its success. The Union fleet on the coast was held in readiness to coöperate as far as possible with Sherman's advance, and to afford him a new base of supply, if at some suitable point he should desire to establish communications with it. When, in the middle of January, 1865, a naval expedition captured Fort Fisher at the mouth of Cape Fear River, an army corps under General Schofield was brought east from Thomas's Army of the Tennessee and sent by the sea to the North Carolina coast to penetrate into the interior and form a junction with Sherman when he should arrive. Having had 5 weeks for rest and preparation, Sherman began the third stage of his campaign on February 1st, with a total of 60,000 men, provisions for 20 days, forage for 7, and a full supply of ammunition for a great battle. This new undertaking proved a task of much greater difficulty and severer hardship than his march to the sea. Instead of the genial autumn weather, the army had now to face the wintry storms that blew in from the neighboring coast. Instead of the dry Georgia uplands, his route lay across a low sandy country cut by rivers with branches at right angles to his line of march, and bordered by broad and miry swamps. But this was an extraordinary army which faced exposure, labor, and peril with a determination akin to contempt. Here were swamps and watercourses to be waded waist deep, endless miles of corduroy road to be laid and relaid as course after course sank into the mud under heavy army wagons, frequent headwater channels of rivers to be bridged, the lines of railroads along their route to be torn up and rendered incapable of repair, food to be gathered by foraging, keeping up, meanwhile, a daily average of 10 or 12 miles of marching. Under such conditions, Sherman's army made a midwinter march of 425 miles in 50 days, crossing 5 navigable rivers, occupying 3 important cities, and rendering the whole railroad system of South Carolina useless to the enemy. The 10,000 to 15,000 Confederates with which General Hardee had evacuated Savannah and retreated to Charleston could, of course, oppose no serious opposition to Sherman's march. On the contrary, when Sherman reached Columbia, the capital of South Carolina, on February 16th, Hardee evacuated Charleston, which had been defended for 4 long years against every attack of a most powerful Union fleet, and where the most ingenious siege works and desperate storming assault had failed to wrest Fort Wagner from the enemy. But though Charleston fell without a battle, and was occupied by the Union troops on the 18th, the destructive hand of war was at last heavily laid upon her. The Confederate government pertinaciously adhered to the policy of burning accumulations of cotton to prevent it falling into Union hands, and the supply gathered in Charleston to be sent abroad by blockade runners having been set on fire by the evacuating Confederate officials, the flames not only spread to the adjoining buildings, but grew into a great conflagration that left the heart of the city a waste of blackened walls to illustrate the folly of the first secession ordinance. Columbia, the capital, underwent the same fate, to even a broader extent. Here the cotton had been piled in a narrow street, and when the torch was applied by similar Confederate orders, the rising wind easily floated the blazing flakes to the near roofs of buildings. On the night following Sherman's entrance, the wind rose to a gale, and neither the efforts of the citizens nor the ready help of Sherman's soldiers were able to check the destruction. Confederate writers long nursed the accusation that it was the Union army which burned the city as a deliberate act of vengeance. Contrary proof is furnished by the orders of Sherman, leaving for the sufferers a generous supply of food, as well as by the careful investigation by the Mixed Commission on American and British Claims under the Treaty of Washington. Still pursuing his march, Sherman arrived at Cheraw March 3d, and opened communication with General Terry, who had advanced from Fort Fisher to Wilmington. Hitherto his advance had been practically unopposed, but now he learned that General Johnston had once more been placed in command of the Confederate forces, and was collecting an army near Raleigh, North Carolina. Well knowing the ability of this general, Sherman became more prudent in his movements. But Johnston was able to gather a force of only 25,000 or 30,000 men, of which the troops Hardee brought from Charleston formed the nucleus. And the two minor engagements on March 16th and 19th did little to impede Sherman's advance to Goldsboro', where he arrived on March 23d, forming a junction with the Union army sent by sea under Schofield, that had reached the same point the previous day. The third giant stride of Sherman's great campaign was thus happily accomplished. His capture of Atlanta, his march to the sea and capture of Savannah, his progress through the Carolinas, and the fall of Charleston, formed an aggregate expedition covering nearly 1,000 miles, with military results that rendered rebellion powerless in the central states of the Southern Confederacy. Several Union cavalry raids had accomplished similar destruction of Confederate resources in Alabama and the country bordering on East Tennessee. Military affairs were plainly in a condition which justified Sherman in temporarily devolving his command on General Schofield, and hurrying by sea to make a brief visit for urgent consultation with General Grant at his headquarters before Richmond and Petersburg. CHAPTER 29